On a crisp autumn evening, the vibrant clamor of New York City seemed to dance through the air, mingling with the soft glow of street lamps and the distant echo of jazz music drifting from lively speakeasies. In the more secluded parts of the city, where shadows stretched long into the narrow alleys, stood an old brownstone house that had seen better days. This was the home and sanctuary of Elias Martin, a young magician whose dreams often soared far beyond the mundane rhythms of the city. Elias, with his keen blue eyes and a mess of dark curls, had always been drawn to the mystical. His fingers, nimble and sure, could make coins vanish into thin air and playing cards shift faces as though alive. Yet, as he stood in the dusty library of his late mentor, Abraham Sinclair, Elias's thoughts were not on his tricks or his growing reputation. They were focused on the myriad of books that lined the ancient shelves, each spine a gateway to untold secrets and enchantments. "I wonder what you were hiding, Abraham," Elias muttered, tracing his fingers over the leather-bound spines. The musty scent of old paper filled his nostrils, a familiar and comforting presence. He pulled out volumes of lore, treatises on illusion, and collections of arcane histories, but nothing seemed out of place until his fingers brushed against a book that felt unusually cold to the touch. The book was bound in dark leather, unmarked and austere, sitting forgotten in the far corner of the lowest shelf. As Elias drew it out, a draft of cold air swept through the room, stirring the papers and whispering secrets in a language long forgotten. The room seemed to grow darker, the walls pressing closer as if eager to listen. "Curiouser and curiouser," Elias whispered to himself, his heart beating with the thrill of discovery. He opened the book to its first page. The script was elegant, almost alive, swirling across the page in shimmering ink. It spoke of ancient pacts and celestial alignments, of powers granted and prices to be paid. As Elias read, his mind swirled with images of starlit rituals and shadowy figures bending reality to their will. He could almost hear Abraham's voice, low and steady, recounting tales of magicians who had dared to delve too deep into these forbidden arts. "Magic is not just tricks and showmanship, Elias. It is a force, raw and untamed. Respect it, or it will consume you." The room grew colder, the air thick with anticipation. Elias felt a pull, a tug at the edges of his mind, as if the book itself was urging him to dive deeper into its mysteries. He knew he should stop, place the book back on the shelf, and forget he ever found it. But curiosity, that ever-persistent itch, drove him onward. He turned the page. Outside, the city continued its restless dance, oblivious to the young magician in the brownstone who stood on the brink of unraveling secrets that should have remained hidden. As Elias's eyes devoured the next page, the words seemed to lift and coil in the air around him, wrapping him in whispers of power and promises of greatness. "I'm stepping into a world Abraham shielded me from," Elias thought, a flicker of doubt shadowing his excitement. Yet, the allure of unknown magic, of a legacy far greater than mere performance, beckoned him irresistibly forward. In the silence of that library, with the night pressing against the windows like a dark, curious specter, Elias spoke a phrase from the book aloud. It was an invocation, soft and hesitant, yet it shattered the stillness like a stone through glass. The room shuddered, and from the depths of the tome, a wind rose, as if a long-held breath had been finally released. And with it, something stirred, something ancient waiting, hungry for the world it had once known. Elias, heart racing with fear and wonder, knew in that moment that his life had irrevocably changed. As the whispering invocation left Elias's lips, the air in the ancient library thickened, charged with a palpable, electric tension. The tome's pages fluttered as if caught in an unseen storm, and the words shimmered, dancing with a sinister grace. Elias watched, transfixed, as shadows gathered in the corners of the room, coiling like smoke. A low hum began to resonate through the walls, a sound not heard but felt, vibrating deep within his bones. "Elias, what have you done?" The voice was his own, murmured under his breath, but laden with a fear he couldn't disguise. His hands trembled slightly, hovering over the book, hesitating whether to close its dark pages and restore the silence, or to continue this forbidden rendezvous with destiny. The decision was snatched from his grasp when a sudden gust, cold and unyielding, swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and throwing the space into near-complete darkness. Only the faint moonlight spilling through the window pane offered any relief from the oppressive black. Elias's heart pounded fiercely against his ribcage, echoing the frantic rhythm of the city's own heartbeat. From the depths of the book, a figure began to materialize, first as a mere wisp of mist, then coalescing into a more defined shape. It was a man, or something that once might have been a man, his features blurred and shifting, eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. This spectre fixed its gaze upon Elias, and in those eyes, the young magician saw centuries of cunning and malice. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, his voice a mix of awe and defiance. The figure's lips twisted into a semblance of a smile, not kind but cruel. "I am Malakai," the spirit answered, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "And you, child, have freed me from my ancient prison." Around them, the room seemed to breathe, the walls inching closer, the shadows stretching towards Elias as if they too were alive. "What do you want?" Elias asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Freedom," Malakai replied simply, as if it were the most natural desire in the world. "Freedom and the power that was once mine. And you, young Elias, will help me reclaim it." Elias's mind raced, panic and fascination warring within him. He knew he should banish the spirit, close the book and seal it away forever. But another part of him, the part that craved knowledge and power, wanted to listen, to learn what this being could teach him. As if sensing his inner turmoil, Malakai stepped closer, the temperature dropping with each movement. "I can teach you secrets, Elias. The lost arts of the ancients, powers your modern world has forgotten. All I ask in return is your assistance." "What kind of assistance?" Elias asked, his curiosity piqued despite the danger. "A small matter," Malakai said, waving a translucent hand dismissively. "There are bindings that still hold me, limits to my strength. With your help, I can break them." "And then?" Elias pressed, needing to understand the full scope of what he was considering. "Then," Malakai's voice dropped to a seductive whisper, "the world will remember what true power feels like." Outside, the wind howled through the streets of New York, carrying whispers of change, of chaos. Inside the library, Elias stood at the crossroads of an unimaginable journey. He felt the weight of his mentor's warnings, the gravity of the magic he was meddling with. "I need time to think," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have until the moon sets," Malakai replied, his form beginning to fade into the gathering darkness. "Choose wisely, Elias Martin." As silence fell once again, Elias sank into the chair, his mind a tumult of thoughts and emotions. The ancient tome lay open before him, an invitation or a warning, he was not yet sure which. As the night deepened, so did his realization that whatever choice he made, there was no turning back. The shadows in the room seemed to nod in agreement, partners now in his fateful decision. As the shadows of the night deepened, Elias wrestled with his decision. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner marked each passing moment with ominous precision. Each tick a reminder of the fleeting time, each talk a nudge towards a destiny not fully understood. Elias's thoughts spiraled, grappling with the gravity of Malakai's offer and the potential darkness it entailed. The words of his late mentor, Abraham, echoed in his mind, a steady drumbeat amid the storm of his thoughts. Asterisk. Magic is a force. It can create or destroy, Elias. Always choose wisely, for every power exacts a price. Asterisk. Elias's fingers brushed against the cold leather of the tome, feeling the pulse of ancient energies within. With the moon tracing its silent arc across the sky, Elias made his decision. He could not venture into this new realm alone. He needed guidance, someone who understood the profound depths of the arcane arts he was about to delve into. At the stroke of midnight, with the moon hanging like a silver coin in the ink-black sky, Elias left the sanctuary of his brownstone. The city's cacophony greeted him, a stark contrast to the somber silence of his library. His steps led him through winding alleys and bustling streets until he reached the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where the real underbelly of New York thrived. He stopped before a nondescript door marked only by a symbol known to those versed in the magical arts, a circle intersected by a triangle. Elias knocked thrice, a coded rhythm that whispered of seeking asylum and knowledge. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in the light of flickering torches. At its end was Madame Vera, a sorceress of notable repute and an old friend of Abraham. Her presence was commanding, her eyes sharp and penetrating, seeing through the facade most carried. "Elias, my boy, what winds blow you into my humble abode at this hour?" Her voice was deep and melodious, tinged with an accent that spoke of distant lands and forgotten spells. "I need your guidance, Madame Vera," Elias began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of doubts in his mind. He recounted the night's events, from the discovery of the tome to the spectral figure of Malakai, and the offer that was laid before him. Madame Vera listened intently, her expression unreadable, the flicker of the torchlight casting dancing shadows across her aged face. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, weighing the tale with the gravity it deserved. "You stand at a dangerous threshold, Elias," she finally said, her gaze intense. "Malakai is no minor spirit. He is ancient and powerful, and his desires will not lead to peace or prosperity. But he offers knowledge, the secrets of the ancients," Elias argued, his internal conflict evident in his tone. "Knowledge," Vera repeated, her voice suddenly soft, "can be a curse as much as it is a blessing. It can consume, Elias, burn away everything until only ash remains. But if you are determined to learn, to face this entity, then you shall not do so alone." Her words offered a measure of comfort, a beacon in the overwhelming darkness. "Will you teach me?" Elias asked, hope threading through his words. "I will do more than teach you, Elias. I will walk this path with you, guide you through the shadows you must navigate," Madame Vera declared, her decision carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. "But be warned, the journey will demand everything of you, possibly even more." Elias nodded, understanding the risks but also the necessity of his quest. Together they turned from the doorway and walked deeper into the labyrinth of Madame Vera's sanctum. The torches flickered as they passed, as if bowing to the gravity of their undertaking. In the heart of her sanctuary, surrounded by relics and tomes of esoteric lore, Elias and Madame Vera began the arduous task of preparing for the confrontation with Malakai. They pored over ancient texts and practiced rites that had not been used for centuries. Each symbol drawn, each word uttered, felt like weaving strands of a larger tapestry, the design of which was known only to those who dared to look. As dawn approached, painting the sky with strokes of amber and gold, Elias felt the first stirrings of a power he had never known, a whisper of the potential that awaited him. But beneath that excitement was a current of fear, for with great power came great peril, and the path he had chosen was fraught with both. In the days that followed his commitment to Madame Vera, Elias found himself drawn deeper into the undercurrents of New York's mystical society, a hidden world where the glitter of the Roaring Twenties masked darker dealings. With each new lesson in magic, Elias's perception of his city transformed, revealing a tapestry woven with power, secrets, and unseen threats. As he and Madame Vera delved into arcane studies by day, Malakai's presence in the city began to manifest more tangibly by night. Elias could feel the subtle shift in the air, a chilling undercurrent beneath the jazz-infused nightlife. Malakai, using the guise of a charismatic socialite, had begun to infiltrate the influential circles of New York's elite. His spectral form had taken on a more solid appearance, that of a man whose charm was as persuasive as it was perilous. From a secluded corner of an opulent ballroom, Elias watched Malakai work the room. The spirit was now dressed in the finery befitting a man of stature, mingling with politicians, moguls, and stars. His laughter was smooth, his conversations laden with allure and promises. With each handshake, each shared secret, Elias observed the subtle glint of dark magic at play. "I don't like this," Elias muttered under his breath, his gaze never straying from Malakai. "Nor should you." Madame Vera, standing beside him, clad in an elegant gown that masked her potent power, whispered back. "He's weaving a spell over the city's power brokers. If he gains control over them, it will be difficult to stop whatever he plans." Elias's hand clenched at his side, frustration brewing within him. "We need to expose him, show them what he truly is." "And we will," Madame Vera assured him, her eyes sharp and calculating. "But it must be done cleverly. We cannot reveal our hand too soon, nor our capabilities." As the night wore on, Elias's unease grew. Watching the ease with which Malakai swayed the city's influencers, the young magician realized the complexity of the battle ahead. They weren't just fighting a spirit, they were fighting an idea, a seductive whisper of power without consequence. After the gala, Madame Vera took Elias to a quiet, dimly lit cafe, a place where magic and reality blurred into soft jazz and shadowy corners. "We must strike a delicate balance," she said, stirring her tea, the steam swirling mysteriously. "Malakai is cunning. He doesn't just want freedom, he wants dominion. Your training must intensify." Elias nodded, absorbing every word. "What more can I do?" "I need to be ready. In addition to our usual training, you need to learn how to counteract his influence. You must understand not just the spells but the psychology of magic. You have to be as charismatic and influential as he is, but in a way that builds trust, not subservience." The following weeks were a blur of grueling sessions. Elias learned not just spells but the art of persuasion, the subtle magic of word and gesture. He practiced until each motion, each phrase, was imbued with magical intent, designed to protect rather than dominate. Late one evening, as they walked through Central Park, the city lights casting long shadows on the path, Elias turned to Madame Vera. "When will I be ready to face him?" Madame Vera stopped, her gaze penetrating the darkness. "Soon, Elias. When you can see through his illusions as easily as you see through the fog of this city." As autumn deepened into winter, Elias felt the weight of his destiny ever more acutely. Each lesson with Madame Vera, each observation of Malakai's increasing power, built him up and tore him down, forging him into a weapon against darkness. But within him, a quiet voice whispered of the immense challenges ahead, of the thin line he walked between power and corruption, and of the city that unknowingly lay in the balance. As the chill of winter began to grip New York, the city's festive lights twinkled like stars, casting a spell of fleeting joy over the bustling streets. Beneath this twinkling facade, Elias found himself in a crucible of arcane study and moral dilemmas, pushing him to the edges of his understanding and strength. The training sessions with Madame Vera had evolved from theoretical studies into practical, intense challenges that mimicked real-world confrontations. They met under the veil of night in locations steeped in ancient energies, abandoned subway stations, forgotten cemeteries, and rooftops overlooking sleeping neighborhoods, places where the veil between worlds was thin. Tonight, their meeting place was an old warehouse by the docks, where the smell of salt and rust hung heavy in the air. The vast, empty space inside was marked with symbols and sigils that glowed faintly under the moonlight filtering through the broken skylights. Elias's breath formed clouds in the cold air as he entered, his senses immediately assaulted by the weight of latent power. Madame Vera was already there, her figure cloaked against the cold. "Tonight's lesson will be different," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "You must learn to wield your power under pressure, to make decisions when every second could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe." Without warning, she flicked her wrist, and the shadows around them stirred. Shapes formed from the darkness, coalescing into figures that were almost human, their features blurred and shifting. "Defend yourself, Elias!" Elias reacted instinctively, drawing on the spells woven into his memory through relentless practice. His hands moved through the air, tracing intricate patterns that sparked with light, erecting barriers between himself and the advancing shadows. The figures tested his defenses, their attacks growing in intensity and cunning with each wave. With each successful defense, Elias grew more confident, but also more drained. The magical exertions demanded a toll on his body and spirit, each spell cast leaving him a shade paler. "Why must it be so exhausting?" he thought, catching his breath during a brief lull. "Is my resolve too weak?" Madame Vera's voice cut through his moment of doubt. "Magic draws from your life force, Elias. It requires not just strength of mind, but strength of will and body. You must build your endurance, for Malakai will not tire." The lesson continued, each attack wave crafted to teach Elias a different aspect of combat. From defense, they moved to counterattacks, where Elias learned to not only block but also to redirect and repurpose the energy thrown against him. "Good." Madame Vera nodded approvingly as Elias managed to turn a shadow's attack into a burst of light that dissolved its brethren. "You're learning to adapt, to turn your opponent's strengths into their weaknesses." As the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, the training session wound down. Elias, exhausted but invigorated, collapsed onto a crate, feeling every bruise and every pulse of his overtaxed muscles. Madame Vera approached, her expression softening. "You did well tonight, Elias. But remember, the real test will be against Malakai. He won't hold back, and his minions will be less forgiving than my shadows." Elias nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I understand. And I'll be ready. Each of these trials, they're not just teaching me magic. They're teaching me about myself, aren't they?" "Exactly," she replied, offering him a small smile. "Magic is as much about knowing oneself as it is about knowing the spells. Fear, doubt, fatigue, they can all be as dangerous as any spell Malakai might cast. You must master yourself before you can hope to master him." As they left the warehouse, the city stirred to life around them, unaware of the unseen battles fought in its shadows. Elias felt a new strength within him, not just from the magic he had wielded, but from the deeper understanding of his own limits and potentials. He knew the path ahead would test him further, but he also knew he would not face it alone, nor unprepared. The winds of change whispered through New York as the city donned its winter cloak, streets lined with fresh snow that muffled the usual cacophony of urban life. Elias, however, found no silence in the snowfall. His mind buzzed with the preparations and anticipations of the impending confrontation with Malakai. Beneath the city's festive veneer, the darker undercurrents of magic and power continued to swirl. Elias's training had intensified, but so had Malakai's maneuvers within the city's elite. It was a chess game played on a grand scale, and Elias knew the time to move from defense to offense was drawing near. In a secluded library filled with ancient books and the smell of aged leather, Elias met with Madame Vera to strategize. The walls were lined with tomes that whispered secrets of their own, should one listen closely enough. Here, amid the musty pages and flickering candlelight, they planned their next move. "Malakai is growing stronger," Madame Vera stated, her fingers tracing the lines of a dusty grimoire. "He's weaving his essence into the fabric of the city, using his newfound influence to corrupt and control. We need to isolate him, cut him off from his sources of power before we confront him directly." Elias nodded, his expression grim. "How do we draw him out? He's surrounded by those he's charmed." "We set a trap," she replied, her eyes alight with a tactical fire. "We use what he wants most against him." "And what does he want?" Elias asked, though part of him feared the answer. "Power," Madame Vera answered simply. "He seeks an ancient artifact known as the Scepter of Tenebris, believed to amplify magical abilities. It's been hidden away in the city for decades, under protections that he's been unable to bypass. But you, Elias, will claim to have found it and offer it as bait. The plan was daring, even reckless. Elias felt a twinge of fear at the thought of wielding such an item, even as a ruse. And when he comes for it, that is when you confront him, she said with a stern nod. Under our conditions, on our ground, where we've prepared the battlefield. The night of the trap, Elias stood in the heart of an abandoned cathedral, its once sacred halls now echoing with the chill of disuse. The scepter of Tenebris, a simple rod of ancient wood crowned with a crystal, lay on the stone altar, its surface shimmering faintly in the moonlight streaming through the stained glass. As the clock struck midnight, a gust of wind swept through the cathedral, heralding Malakai's arrival. The spirit appeared at the entrance, his form more solid than ever, a testament to the power he had accrued. His eyes found Elias and the scepter, a gleam of greed flickering across his features. Elias, you've proven a worthy adversary. Malakai's voice echoed through the vast space, smooth and cold as the marble beneath their feet. Hand over the scepter, and I may yet spare your city from further strife. Elias's heart pounded, not just from fear but from the adrenaline of the moment. This was the culmination of all his training, all his fears, all his resolve. Come and take it, he challenged, his voice resonant and more confident than he felt. Malakai advanced, his steps measured and deliberate. As he did, Elias began to chant, words taught to him by Madame Vera, invoking protections and bindings. The air around them crackled with energy, visible currents of power swirling as Elias's and Malakai's magics collided. The confrontation was fierce. Malakai's magic was potent, honed over centuries of captivity and anger. But Elias, fortified by his recent training and the righteous cause of protecting his city, met each of Malakai's attacks with a counter of his own. The cathedral became a battlefield of light and shadow, each spell illuminating the ancient frescoes with bursts of ethereal light. As dawn approached, Elias found a crack in Malakai's defenses, an overreach of his power that left him vulnerable. Seizing the moment, Elias deployed a spell they had prepared for just such an opportunity, a binding spell enhanced by the very artifact that Malakai coveted. The crystal atop the scepter glowed brightly, its light engulfing the spirit in a cage of pure energy. Malakai roared in frustration and defiance, but the bindings held, tightening with every attempt he made to escape. Exhausted but triumphant, Elias stood firm, watching as the spirit that had haunted his city was finally subdued. Madame Vera emerged from the shadows, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Well done, Elias. You've done. As the first light of dawn cast its pale glow through the stained glass windows of the cathedral, Elias stood before the subdued spirit of Malakai, his chest heaving with the exertion of battle and the weight of victory. The bindings that held the ancient spirit shimmered with a light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the city itself. It was over, or so it seemed. Madame Vera approached, her footsteps echoing softly against the stone floor. You have done well, Elias. Better than I had hoped, she said, her voice carrying a mix of relief and foreboding. Elias, still catching his breath, looked down at the scepter in his hand, its crystals still glowing softly. What now? He asked, his voice tinged with fatigue. Is this the end? It is only a beginning, Madame Vera responded, her gaze fixed on the bound figure of Malakai. Malakai was not working alone. His influence has spread deeper into the city's marrow than we feared. We must act swiftly to root it out completely. Elias's heart sank with these words. The thought of further conflicts lurking in the shadows of his city dampened the triumph of the moment. How many more are there? He questioned, a sense of dread creeping into his voice. We do not know yet, she admitted, turning to face him fully. But the network is extensive. The elite he charmed are mere puppets. Some know of the magic they are entwined with, others do not. We need to gather more allies, Elias. This battle was won, But the war is far from over. The reality of her words settled over Elias like the heavy cloak of winter. The weight of responsibility, the need for vigilance, became clearer with each passing moment. "Where do we start?" he asked, determination setting his jaw. "First, we secure Malakai here. Then, we gather those who are loyal, those who can fight against the darkness without faltering," Madame Vera explained, her eyes scanning the cathedral as if seeing beyond its walls. They spent the remainder of the day fortifying the cathedral, turning it from a place of worship to a stronghold of magic. Madame Vera called upon old allies, mystics and magicians who had once walked in the shadows but now stepped forward to defend their city. As dusk fell, they gathered within the hallowed walls, a diverse group of individuals with skills forged in secrecy and solitude. Each one carried a story of encounters with the darker side of magic, of battles fought in silence and sacrifices made away from the eyes of the public. Elias looked around at the assembled group, feeling a mix of awe and apprehension. These were the hidden defenders of New York, the unseen guardians against the encroaching darkness. He felt both small among them and yet vital, as their leader by circumstance if not by choice. Madame Vera introduced him to each ally, detailing their strengths and the roles they would play. There was Jonah, a burly man with a talent for protective wards; Lena, a young witch whose specialty was in divination and surveillance; Marcus, an alchemist with the knowledge of ancient potions and antidotes; and several others, each with unique abilities. As they shared their knowledge and planned their strategy, Elias felt the camaraderie of warriors bound by a common cause. The cathedral, with its arches and echoes, seemed to accept its new role, its walls resonant with the murmur of plans and the energy of prepared spells. Late into the night, they mapped out the city, marking key points where Malakai's influence was strongest. "We strike swiftly and silently," Madame Vera instructed. "We free those who can be freed, and contain those who pose a danger." Elias listened, his mind racing with strategies and spells. He was no longer just a magician, a performer of tricks for the amusement of others. He was a leader in a hidden war, a protector of the unknowing millions who slept while darkness crept through their streets. As the meeting adjourned, Elias stood alone in the center of the cathedral, the weight of his new role settling around him. He looked at the scepter, now quiet, its light dimmed. He whispered to it, half in jest, half in earnest, "Keep your secrets a little longer. We have work to do." Outside, the city continued its restless sleep, unaware of the forces that moved to protect it. Inside, Elias prepared for the battles to come, knowing that each victory brought them closer to peace, and each defeat would cost more than they might bear. The war for the soul of New York had just begun. As winter's embrace tightened around New York, the city, blanketed in snow, sparkled under the shimmering lights of approaching festivities. Elias, cloaked not just against the cold but the weight of his secret war, moved through the streets with a purpose that few could guess. Tonight was the Enchanted Gala, an annual event that drew the city's elite, now a chosen battlefield in their hidden war against the darkness Malakai had seeded. The gala was to be held at one of the grandest halls in the city, a place of opulence that tonight would be both shield and lure. The plan was meticulous. Using the gala as a cover, they would isolate and confront key figures under Malakai's influence, severing the tendrils of control with precision and discretion. Elias entered the venue early, under the guise of a performer, his magician's attire his armor, his props now tools of a far more dangerous trade. The hall was a cathedral of glass and marble, chandeliers like constellations hung overhead, casting a celestial glow over the guests who were beginning to trickle in. Madame Vera, ever the strategist, was disguised among the catering staff, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her hat. Jonah, Lena, Marcus, and the others were also woven into the fabric of the event, each positioned to act at a moment's notice. As the night unfolded, the music swelled and laughter filled the air, the opulence of the gala masking the undercurrent of the operation underway. Elias circulated through the crowd, his magician's charm a key to every circle. His real magic, however, lay hidden, whispered in incantations too soft to be overheard, each hand gesture part of a larger spell weaving protection and clarity around the guests. Magic is more than spectacle, Elias thought as he navigated the throng, recalling Madame Vera's teachings. It's understanding the unseen, manipulating the threads that bind reality. Lena, using her divination skills, subtly signaled to Elias from across the room. She had identified one of the guests, a prominent businessman, as a key node in Malakai's network. With a nod, Elias approached, his smile a mask, his heart a drumbeat echoing through the grand hall. "May I show you something extraordinary?" Elias asked the businessman, who, intrigued, allowed himself to be led to a quieter corner. With a flourish of his hands, Elias performed a series of illusions that delighted the man, each trick cleverly designed to weave a spell of unbinding. As the final card trick unfolded, the man blinked rapidly, as if waking from a deep sleep, his confusion clear as the spell broke Malakai's hold. "Are you all right, sir?" Elias asked, his tone laced with concern but his eyes searching for signs of lingering influence. "Yes, I suddenly feel clearer," the man confessed, shaking his head as though to clear the last vestiges of fog. "Thank you, I hadn't realized I was so burdened." As the night progressed, similar rescues were executed with finesse and care. With each intervention, the network Malakai had built began to crumble, piece by piece, their actions as silent as the falling snow outside. The climax of the evening was Elias's grand performance on the central stage, a spectacle of light and shadow that had the audience enraptured. Beneath the surface, however, was the true purpose of the act: to cast a wide-scale spell of purification over the hall, cleansing any residual dark magic. The spell cascaded like a silent wave, invisible to the eye but palpable to those sensitive to the arcane. As it washed over the crowd, a collective sigh rippled through the room, the atmosphere lightening, a sense of liberation settling in the hearts of the unknowing guests. After the gala, as the guests departed, lighter in spirit though unaware of why, Elias and his team regrouped, their faces weary but their eyes alive with quiet victory. They had turned the tide, disrupted Malakai's plans, and reclaimed many of the city's influential from his grasp. Back in the now empty hall, Elias stood alone for a moment, looking at his reflection in the grand mirror that dominated the foyer. The man looking back was no longer just a magician of card tricks and illusions, but a true sorcerer who had moved the pieces of his own life in a game much larger than he had ever imagined. "Tonight we did more than perform," Elias whispered to his reflection, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "We changed the course of a hidden war." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, each flake a silent witness to the unseen battle fought and won within the walls of the grand hall. The war was far from over, but tonight, they had won a crucial battle, one that brought them closer. The victory at the enchanted gala, while significant, was but a prelude to the challenges that lay ahead for Elias and his clandestine group of mystics. The snow still blanketed New York, its pristine white a stark contrast to the dark undercurrents that continued to pulse beneath the city's vibrant surface. The battle had shifted the balance, yet the war against Malakai's dark influence was far from concluded. In the days following the gala, Elias found himself more vigilant than ever, his senses attuned to the slightest whisper of arcane energy. The city, alive with the bustle of daily commerce and the laughter of the unknowing, seemed to him a chessboard of light and shadow, each piece moving with potential significance. Madame Vera called for a meeting at the stronghold they had established within the confines of the fortified cathedral. The stained glass windows, once mere ornaments, now served as silent sentinels, their colorful panes watching over the gathering of those sworn to protect the city. "Malakai's network has been fractured, but not destroyed," Madame Vera began, her voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "Our next move must be decisive. He knows now that we are not merely reacting but actively opposing him. He will be desperate." Elias, standing beside a map of the city marked with areas of known magical activity, felt the weight of their next decision. "We need to draw him out, force him into the open where we can confront him directly," he suggested, his fingers tracing the lines that converged at a central point on the map. "And so we shall," Madame Vera agreed, nodding towards Lena, who stepped forward, her eyes alight with an intensity born of her divinatory powers. "I have seen a vision," Lena shared, her voice steady despite the eerie nature of her revelation. "Malakai seeks an ancient artifact buried beneath the city, one that could give him enough power to overshadow all we have done to contain him." The group absorbed this information with a mix of dread and resolve. The artifact, known as the Orb of Night, was legendary, a source of immense power that could tip the scales irrevocably in Malakai's favor if it fell into his hands. "We strike at dawn," Elias decided, his strategy clear. "We find the orb before Malakai can reach it, and use it to end this, once and for all." The night before their decisive move was restless for Elias. He wandered the quiet halls of their stronghold, his mind racing with scenarios of what might come. Each step he took resonated with the echo of choices made and the price yet to be paid. Dawn broke with a crimson hue, painting the snow-draped city with streaks of gold and red, a sky aflame with the promise of an ending, be it in fire or in triumph. The team moved through the deserted streets, their breath visible in the cold morning air, a misty trail of warriors set against the backdrop of a waking city. They reached the location Lena had divined, an unassuming section of the old subway tunnels long abandoned and forgotten by all but the city's hidden chroniclers. The air grew colder as they descended, the darkness enveloping them like a cloak. Elias led the way, his staff alight with a soft glow that banished the shadows before them. The tunnel ended at an ancient door, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the presence of Elias's light. The door opened without sound, revealing a chamber that had not seen the light for centuries. In its center lay the Orb of Night, its surface swirling with a darkness deeper than the shadows that surrounded it. As Elias stepped forward, the chamber shook with a sudden force, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. Malakai emerged from the shadows, his form now fully corporeal, his eyes burning with malice and desperation. "You are too late, Elias," Malakai sneered, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The orb is mine." What followed was a battle of wills and magic, the air crackling with energy as Elias and Malakai unleashed their powers upon each other. The chamber flickered with light and shadow, spells colliding with the force of thunder, the ground beneath them cracking with the strain of their conflict. Elias, fueled by the need to protect his city, to end the threat once and for all, channeled his every lesson, every ounce of power he had learned through his trials. With a final, desperate thrust of magical energy, he directed the combined power of his team towards Malakai, ensnaring the dark mage in a web of light that was as much a prison as it was a purging flame. Malakai's scream was a sound of defeat, his form dissipating within the brilliance of the spell, leaving behind only the faint. In the aftermath of the cataclysmic battle in the underground chamber, a silence fell over the space that seemed to echo through the corridors of the city above. The Orb of Night lay dormant on the cold stone floor, its ominous glow extinguished. Elias, supported by his companions, stood over it, his chest heaving with each breath, the toll of the battle evident in his weary eyes and slumped shoulders. "Is it over?" Elias asked, his voice a whisper that barely rose above the quiet hum of the lingering magical energies. Madame Vera, her own face marked with fatigue and relief, nodded solemnly. "Yes, Elias. Malakai's presence is no more. The shadows he cast over New York have been dispelled." The group gathered around the orb, their faces lit by the faint light emanating from Elias's staff. The artifact, once a source of peril, now seemed little more than an ancient relic, its threat neutralized by their united effort. "We must ensure nothing like this ever endangers our city again," Elias stated, his gaze fixed on the orb. "This artifact must be secured." Madame Vera agreed, her eyes thoughtful. It will be placed under guard and protected by spells that will alert us to any disturbance. This time, we will not be caught unawares. The journey back to the surface was a quiet one, each member of the group lost in their thoughts, reflecting on the trials they had endured and the victory they had achieved. The city that greeted them was the same as they had left it, yet everything felt different. The air was lighter, the sky clearer, and even the snow seemed to sparkle a little brighter under the morning sun. In the days that followed, New York slowly began to awaken to a new normal. The magical disturbances that had once been a frequent peril became a thing of the past. The citizens, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to a darkness that could have swallowed them whole, continued their lives with the usual hustle and bustle. Elias, however, found himself changed. No longer just a performer of sleight of hand, he had become a guardian of something much greater. His nights were no longer spent in clubs and theaters but patrolling the energies of the city, ensuring that the peace they had fought so hard to achieve remained undisturbed. Madame Vera and the others formed a council, overseeing the magical defenses of the city. They met regularly in the cathedral, which had become their headquarters, to discuss threats and strategies. Their group had grown, attracting other mystics who wished to join their cause, drawn by tales of the battle against Malakai and inspired by the leadership of Elias. One evening, as the sun set over the city, painting the skyline with hues of orange and pink, Elias stood atop one of the tall buildings overlooking the park. He watched as families and couples enjoyed the peace of the early evening, their laughter and chatter a balm to his soul. He thought back to the nights filled with uncertainty and danger, the weight of destiny on his shoulders. A small smile played on his lips as he realized that despite everything, he would choose this path again. The city he loved was safe because he had dared to stand against the darkness. Turning from the view, Elias walked back inside. The door to the rooftop closed softly behind him, sealing him away from the world he watched over. As he descended the stairs, his steps were light, unburdened by fear or doubt. In his heart, he carried the quiet confidence of a battle well fought and a future secured, his resolve strengthened by the knowledge that he and his allies were ready to face whatever challenges might come. New York, for all its lights and shadows, was his home, and he was its unseen sentinel, a keeper of secrets and a wielder of light. And as the city moved below him, Elias knew he was exactly where he was meant to be, guardian of a world hidden in plain sight. As Elias descended the steps from the rooftop, the echoes of his footfalls resonated in the stillness of the evening, a symphonic reminder of the solitude that now accompanied his vigilance. The streets below, alive with the city's nocturnal rhythm, were oblivious to the guardian who walked among them. New York, with its ceaseless pulse, had narrowly skirted the shadow of an eternal night, its citizens none the wiser. The days following the battle saw Elias and the council working tirelessly. The cathedral, once a place of quiet reflection and worship, had transformed into the nerve center for the city's magical defenses. Here, strategies were devised and spells were woven, each thread of magic strengthening the protective weave that enveloped the city. Madame Vera stood at the forefront of these efforts, her wisdom a guiding light. "We have been given a second chance," she often said during their meetings. "Let us use it wisely." Her words were not just a call to action but a reminder of the responsibility they all shared. Elias found himself at the center of this new order. The man who had once entertained crowds with tricks now held their fate in his hands. It was a role he had never envisioned for himself, yet one he embraced with a solemn dedication. Each decision he made, each spell he cast, was with the knowledge that the peace they now enjoyed could be as fragile as the thawing ice that lined the city streets. As the winter gave way to the first signs of spring, the city began to shed the remnants of the season's chill. The snow melted, filling the gutters with the murmured secrets of the past months. Elias watched the transformation from the high windows of the cathedral, the changing seasons mirroring the shift within himself. One crisp morning, as the city awoke to the soft hues of dawn, Elias met with his team in the main hall of the cathedral. The group had grown, each member drawn to the cause by the ripple effects of their victory. Among them were new faces, eager and determined, their energies fresh and vibrant. "We are not just defenders, we are custodians of peace," Elias addressed the group, his voice carrying across the vaulted ceilings. "Each of you has a role to play in ensuring that the darkness we fought does not return." Their tasks were many: monitoring the ley lines that crisscrossed beneath the city, educating the new recruits on the subtle arts of magical defense, and most importantly, maintaining the spells that shielded their world from the eyes of the unknowing. Lena, with her keen insight, led the surveillance efforts. Her ability to divine potential threats had become invaluable. "The city speaks to those who listen," she would say as she traced the maps that lined the walls of their command center. Jonah, with his robust command of protective magic, took charge of training the newcomers. His sessions, often held in the shadowed corners of the cathedral, were both rigorous and enlightening. As the sun reached its zenith one day, painting the sky with a brilliance that seemed to herald a new era, Elias stood before the gathered mystics. "This city is a living entity, vibrant and ever-changing. It is our duty to protect its heart as much as its people." The response was a unified nod, a silent pact made amongst those who had chosen to stand between the mundane world and the arcane. In the quiet moments of solitude, Elias would return to the rooftop, looking out over the city that was his charge. The skyline was a jagged horizon of dreams and aspirations, each light a heartbeat, each shadow a whisper of what had once threatened to unravel the fabric of their reality. "The city breathes easier now," Elias thought as he watched a pair of birds soar across the sunset-streaked sky, their flight a dance of freedom. "And so can I." But the peace was not just a cessation of conflict. It was an ongoing promise, a commitment to guard, to protect, and to serve. New York, for all its complexity, was a tapestry of lives interwoven with threads of magic and mundanity. Elias, once a mere performer, now found his greatest role in being its unseen guardian, a sentinel of the secret world that lay hidden beneath the surface. As night fell and the city lit up once more, its endless energy a beacon of resilience, Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. Here, in the hidden folds of reality, he and his allies worked in the shadows to keep the light shining bright, their vigilance a silent, sacred duty to the city they loved. As Elias watched the city transition from the vibrant hues of sunset into the deep blues of twilight, his mind wandered through the corridors of his past and the uncharted paths of his future. Standing on the rooftop, the city's symphony rose to meet him, the distant hum of traffic, the soft chatter of passers-by, the intermittent laughter from the streets below. Each sound was a testament to the life he had sworn to protect, a life that continued unabated thanks to the silent guardianship he and his allies provided. Inside the cathedral, the council had adjourned, leaving behind the echoes of their planning. The room, with its ancient stones and stained glass windows, held the weight of history and the newfound purpose they had infused into its walls. Elias lingered by the doorway, his hand resting on the cool surface of the carved wood, feeling the grain beneath his fingers as if trying to draw strength from it. The battle against Malakai had ended, but the war, Elias knew, was a continuing saga of vigilance. "Peace is a garden," Madame Vera had once said during their strategizing sessions. "It requires tending, nurturing, and sometimes, the pruning of invasive weeds." Her words resonated with Elias now more than ever, as he considered the challenges that lay ahead. As he descended the steps back into the heart of the cathedral, his footsteps were silent, measured. The responsibility of leadership had settled upon his shoulders, a mantle he had not sought but now wore with a quiet honor. He paused at the entrance to the main hall, where the moonlight streamed through the rose window, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor. Elias thought about the team, Lena, Jonah, Marcus, and the others. Each had come to this cause by different paths, driven by a shared conviction and a deep commitment to the safety of the mystical and mundane worlds. Their diversity was their strength, each bringing different skills and perspectives, yet united under the banner of protection and secrecy. I am not alone in this, Elias reflected, a slight smile touching his lips. This realization brought a comforting warmth, dispersing the cold isolation that command often carried. As he walked through the hall, each step echoed a promise, a vow to those who walked by his side and to the city that lay beyond the cathedral's ancient walls. In the days that followed, Elias's role as a guardian took on new dimensions. He spent nights walking the boundaries of their protected zone, reinforcing the wards that Lena had pinpointed as critical. By day, he trained with Jonah, learning to weave stronger protections, spells that could shield against not just magical threats but the creeping doubt that shadowed such tireless vigilance. One evening, as he stood overseeing the training of new recruits in the cathedral's expansive underground chamber, Elias allowed himself a moment to watch the interaction of his team. Their dedication, their laughter even amidst the gravity of their tasks, filled him with hope. "We're building something lasting here," he mused, his eyes tracing the arcs of light cast by the trainees' spells. "Not just a defense, but a legacy." As the session ended, Elias addressed the group, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "Each of you is part of a living history," he began, his tone imbued with the weight of their shared experiences. "What we do here, the protection we provide, is not just for today but for all the tomorrows to come." The recruits listened, their faces a mixture of resolve and awe, inspired by the depth of their mission. They understood, perhaps for the first time, the true scale of their commitment. They were not just protectors. They were the unseen architects of peace, the silent sentinels who ensured the city's heartbeat continued unimpeded by the shadows that sought to still it. That night, as Elias returned to his apartment, the cityscape spread out before him, a mosaic of light and life, so ordinary yet extraordinary in its persistence. He stood at his window, a solitary figure against the backdrop of an ever-awake New York, his heart both heavy and light. "Tomorrow we continue," he whispered to the reflection that stared back at him, a reflection of a man changed, forged in the fires of battle and baptized in the waters of newfound purpose. "For the city, for the peace, for the future." And in that quiet night, as the city breathed around him, Elias felt a profound connection to it all, a thread woven invisibly into the fabric of New York, guardian of its hidden magic and keeper of its exposed dreams. Thank you for sharing a moment of your day with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Really helps a lot. If you don't, well, I'll still love you. Thanks for stopping by.